So with all that in mind, pretty good transition actually, watch this. A couple of years ago, there was a high school in Chicago that needed to raise some funds quickly. And then someone came up with the genius idea of playing one of Justin Bieber's songs, Baby, Baby, Baby. Anyone like that one? Yeah, baby, yeah. And this is what they did. They would actually play that song nonstop between classes, and the only way it would stop is if somebody made a donation. And within 3 days, they raised the full $1,000 that they need. Chris, can you give us a taste of Baby, Baby, Baby? Okay. Actually, where's Kurt? Hey, buddy, maybe we should do that from Sunday, from here on out. Until we raise what we need, we're playing Justin Bieber here only. Play it again, Chris, to give people a taste. What's that? That's good? So anyways, so stop it, right? Just stop it, Manifold. Stop the dancing, stop the music. You understand what that's all about. You know what that feeling is. It feels gross. You block your ears. You will do almost anything to make that kind of pain stop. And it is that exact feeling that Mark is going to take us through in this 9th chapter, that something is coming down the pipe, and the disciples feel like they want to do everything within their power to stop it. Now, we feel a little bit of a turning point in the story of Jesus here, because he is directly in the tractor beams of the cross. Nothing can stop it, nothing can slow it down, and the disciples still can't wrap their heads around what Jesus is destined for, and in turn, what it will cost them if they should choose to follow his lead. So with that feeling as a background, this morning we're going to talk a little bit about discouragement. We're going to talk about the temptation to linger when you should really move on. And then finally, we're going to talk about what selling mirrors online can teach us about true greatness. So Mark chapter 9 begins like this. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. And there he transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. So all of a sudden in chapter 9 here, this turns like into the climax of a movie. All the main characters are all showing up on the same stage at the same time. It sort of feels like this. It's not quite like this, but you get the idea. All the important characters have showed up. They're there and they're glowing. And it's vital for Jesus' inner circle to see this and to take it all in. Why? Because Moses and Elijah represent bookends of the Jewish faith. Moses represents the law, the rules, the order of how things are meant to be. And then Elijah, on the other hand, represents the prophets, that lovingly critical voice that calls God's people back when they have lost their way. And there, standing between them, is Jesus, bridging these two worlds as he wears sparkling white. Well, that's a clue for us here this morning. There's a couple of things worth noting. White is the color of martyrs. So Jesus is going to bridge these two worlds in a certain way. He is sending a signal. He is continuing what God started in Moses, continued through Elijah, and that continuation continues with the prediction of his own death. Weird. That is a lot for Peter, James, and John to take in, but there's more. Because we need to remember by this point, the disciples are down and they are discouraged. Last week we talked about it, right? Jesus broke the news to them that he was destined to suffer and die. And now they all arrive on this mountaintop only to find two other figures who also climb mountains at the height of their own discouragement. Remember the stories with me if you can. Moses. The last time we saw Moses on a mountaintop, he was going to get the backup copies of the Ten Commandments. Right? Because the last time before that, he went and got them. He's coming down the mountain. He sees and he's discouraged and he's disappointed that the people of Israel have now made this golden calf while he was away for the weekend, and they're worshiping that. He gets so upset that he throws it down on the ground. They shatter into a million pieces. And we're not talking about just any guy here. We're talking about Moses. Moses, the great Moses, the representative of the law, is discouraged and just spent. And then you have Elijah. Now, his famous mountaintop experience was then when he was on the run for his life. So he was trying to escape death. He makes his way up the mountain. When he gets to the top, he actually says to God, "Please take my life." He was so discouraged. He was so beaten down that he wanted to die. We're not talking about just any dude. We're talking about Elijah, who represents the prophets. And in that moment, he is just done with life. So now Peter, James, and John, and maybe you and I, maybe we show up in that same place this morning. So let me ask you, are you discouraged today? Do you feel completely spent? Are you at that same point that Elijah was at, where he was just about done with life? If you're in any one of those spots this morning, let me offer you this encouragement, that many of the great achievements of the world were accomplished by tired and discouraged people who kept on working. So if you are battered and bruised this morning, if things are just not working out the way that you had hoped, if you are not sure if you can go any further, the opening verses of Mark 9 remind us this morning to keep going. To keep going, friends. What if God is waiting to actually meet you in the middle of your discouragement? Maybe you have to get to that point where Jesus is finally able to bridge God's world with your world. Maybe he's waiting to show you something spectacular. So if you are down and discouraged and spent and beat up this morning, the message from Mark 9 for you is this: keep going. You are not alone in this, and you're not the first person to be discouraged or disappointed. And so then, maybe you can also find some comfort. Find comfort in knowing that God's not finished with you yet. That he who began a good work in you, says Philippians 1, is faithful to complete it. So keep going, friends. Keep going. I actually really wish that someone had mentioned that to Peter in that moment. Because in that moment for him, his instincts weren't to keep going. His instincts were to just stop. Here's how the story continues. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And he did not know what to say. They were so frightened. And then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." And suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And they kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. Now, even though Peter continues to miss the point, it's really hard to blame him. Because remember, Jesus had just said that he was going to suffer and die, and then all the disciples get depressed about it, and then he gets selected to be in this inner circle to go up the mountain with Jesus, and he gets to the mountain. Who's there? Obi-Wan and Yoda. That's blowing his mind. Everyone is glowing. Of course, in that moment, after hearing all that bad news, after being depressed, getting to that mountaintop experience, of course someone's going to say, "Stop. Let's just stop right here. Let's forget what happened, and with that craziness about where things are going, let's forget that too. Jesus, can we just stop right here?" Of course he wants to camp out in that great moment. Who wouldn't want to freeze time when things are going awesome? Maybe you felt those same feelings before. You know when it usually comes in for me? When you're on like the second last or last day of vacation, and you just had like an amazing week, and you're like, I gotta go back to work tomorrow. Oh, this is terrible. I wish I had 1 more day, 2 more days, 10 more months, and I would just be ready to get back in the swing of things. You know that feeling, right? Or perhaps you've planned for some great event in life, and you've built up to it, and you've done all the work, you've got up to the mountain, and you enjoy that day. You enjoy that evening only to recognize that Monday is around the corner, and then you gotta slink right back into your regular routines. Now, this really hit me a few weeks ago. It was in my home office, and we've got a bunch of old hard drives. And these are the hard drives where we keep all our family photos and videos. And I've got these on such old hard drives that there's actually moving parts, like they whiz around, and there's magnets and weird things. And I got this little machine that I plug them into, and that's getting a bit wonky right now. So I've got to jam like napkins and a marker a certain way to hold the cord so my computer can read it. So I'm getting nervous that I'm not going to be able to access any of these pictures, so I want to get them up in the cloud. So I get the first drive, and I click onto the first file. The first file says 2006, and I open it. And what I see there from 2006 melts my heart. It's my kids. They're 4 and they're 2. And they have the sweetest little faces and the brightest blonde hair, and they're talking about the craziest things, and look at them walk and look at them swing. And for their sake this morning, I'm not going to show any of those pictures because I'm an awesome dad like that. But you get what I'm saying, right? You're transported back into this time, and your heart sinks because you're like, oh, wow, we had it so good. I really wish we could have frozen that in time. Wouldn't that have been amazing? And then I looked over, and I saw another file that said 2007. So I clicked 2007 and I opened it, and my heart began to melt again. Look at all the great things that happened in 2007. And then I moved to 2008 and I saw even more great things. And every one of those junctures I wanted to stop and say, can we just go back to that time? Oh, if I could have just frozen time in that moment. Everything wasn't perfect, but man, it was so beautiful. And then I recognized that if I had stopped or frozen 2006 or 7 or 8, then I would have missed 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, and so on. Now, were there bumps and bruises for our family along the way? Of course. Every family is like that. But as great as those moments were, we couldn't live there. We couldn't stay there because those moments were on the way to something else. And that's what Peter is struggling with in this moment. He wants to linger in that awesome space. He wants to stay in that 2006 file. But in that moment, God breaks in with a loud voice and says, listen up. Listen to what Jesus has to say. Figure out where this is all going. Do you see where this has to go? And the disciples are trying to make this compute, and it's so hard. They're trying to figure it out. And Jesus says, hey, you'll understand it. You'll talk about it. Don't tell anybody. Talk about it after I'm gone. And they have to sit with that feeling. That feeling of, I love this so much, but I can't stop here because I know that this moment is actually on the way to something else. Which might be the next question for us out of the scriptures this morning. And that question is this: what's next? Wherever you are, whatever moment in life you find yourself in, is this the question that you are asking God? God, what's next? Where are we on the way to? What do you want from me? Are you in that pocket, or are you more the lingering type? Are you more the lamenting type? Oh, things were much better in 2006 or 5 or 4 or 3 or 2. I really wish I could get back to those moments. Or do you recognize that Jesus is on the way to something and that he really wants you to get in on that? Because here's the truth of the matter, folks. We cannot live in those mountaintop experiences. Why? Because they are not reality right now, and it's not what God intends just yet. Because we do believe as Christians that there is a day coming where we will be face to face with our Creator, and somehow in eternity we will be able to be in God's presence without being melted away. I don't know how that works. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be miraculous. I don't know the whole picture, but I know I want it. I know that day is coming, but we are not quite there yet. Now, if we were to stretch the imagery a little bit further then, if we're on the way to somewhere else, if we're not quite there yet, if we do have these pockets of amazing moments, maybe we could think of them like this. When you have a moment where you feel really close to God, that God is near, He is speaking, He is leading, you're just locked in. My challenge to you would be resist to do what Peter wanted to do, and that's to build a tent and just live there. Instead, consider building a throne, so to speak, saying, Jesus, I submit to you again and again and again and again every day because I trust you. I trust you, Jesus. So then what's next? But you see, for the disciples, they weren't quite there yet. They left that place and passed through Galilee, and Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. And he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. In my mind, it's like they're on a family road trip and it's in the middle of the station wagon and all the kids are bickering about who's the greatest. Like, this is what's happening here in that moment. So sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. And he took a little child whom he placed among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. So it is obvious to tell from this last part of the episode that the disciples are regressing, and the irony is startling. Jesus is talking about lowering himself while the disciples are talking about who's getting the next promotion. And so Jesus designs and gives them this object lesson to disrupt everything they've known to be true about power and greatness. You see, in first century Palestinian society, a child was not the symbol of innocence or unspoiled purity like we would obviously see them today. Now, historically, kids weren't idealized until the 19th century, so it's a fairly new concept. So way back in the Jesus day, when it came to kids, they had lacked any social status, they had no legal rights, they ranked at the bottom of social and the economic scale because authority ran from the top down. And at the top of the food chain were old men, and everybody else in the household lived to support and to serve the oldest men. So in that makeup, the kids are way at the bottom. Why? Because they really have nothing meaningful to add. They can't contribute in any way. They've achieved nothing, and any sort of potential they might have is still a far way off. On top of that, in Jewish and Greek thinking, kids were never seen as possible role models for adults. And that's what makes the words of Jesus here so striking. Because Jesus is reversing the world's power structure. Because no one before that time had ever suggested that the greatest weren't the first, but the last. So not the strong, but the vulnerable. Not the ones who are served, but the ones who serve. And that is the key to this passage, and that is the big target that Jesus is aiming at. Plus, there's a deliberate little wordplay in here. Jesus more than likely was speaking the Aramaic language, and the word for child and the word for servant are actually the exact same word. So what Jesus was saying to his disciples and to you and I this morning is that true power is only found in the humility of being childlike. True greatness is not found in dominating people, in dominating countries, in dominating industries, but in serving. That to join God in the renewal of all things is to put others first and ourselves last, and again reverse the power structure and order of this world. Now, if I can read your mind right now, you're probably thinking, well, how do we do that? That sounds impossible on the best of days. I feel that too. But I think there's one step that we can actually take to help us get in that space of getting ourselves out of the way. And I want you to think about it like this. People sell a lot of things on the internet. And one of the things that people seem to have the most difficulty selling are actually mirrors. Because it's hard to take a good picture of a mirror without getting yourself in the way. Let me give you some examples of attempts here. Here we have the family attempt. Yo, son, you just hold that. Don't smile, don't laugh. I'll stand back here at the back of the kitchen. No one will see me. We'll take a picture. We'll definitely sell this mirror for 3 times what we paid for it. Then you've got someone like this, super creative. Look at this guy. This guy knows what he is doing. But of course, with every smart guy, there's a doubly smart woman, because check this out. She uses her foot. Now, I don't understand why a foot is less intrusive than a hand. Either way, if she can click the picture with her big toe, that's a big deal. Here are some other approaches. We have the Casper the Friendly Ghost approach. We've got old man and iPod approach. This is a good one too, because it seems like if I can get my butt just out of this picture far enough, like they'll never see me. But you can tell that he's making an effort, right? But then you've got, kids like this, who's obviously taking a picture for grandma, and this is at grandma's house, because who else has green shag carpet? He doesn't care if he's in the picture. He is just going to take it. Now, my favorite one of all, though, is this one right here, because there's a whole like mystery involved. It's sort of like a Scooby-Doo mystery. Like, check this out. So this guy is selling some side view mirrors. He's obviously in a neck brace. It might be Halloween, jack-o'-lantern, and there's a cable for like a fax machine or something in the top right corner, which leads us to the question, what happened to the rest of the car and maybe your family? So when we look at pictures like this, it's easy to tell who's making an effort to get out of the way and who's not making an effort. Some people are more aware that they're in view than others. But we can see, even if people are making an effort, even if they're trying their hardest, it almost seems impossible to get ourselves out of the way. And I think there's a connection right there to what Jesus is teaching us. That is, to get ourselves out of the way, our greed, our pride, our need for security, our need to be recognized, that's certainly going to be a lifelong battle for all of us. And sometimes it takes some real acrobatics. But like selling mirrors online, it's obvious who's trying and who's not, and who's self-aware and who's not. And so Jesus reminds us this morning that true greatness is about self-sacrifice, about getting yourself out of the picture, and not self-aggrandizement where you make sure you are front and center and everything is about you. Because like we've said 1,000,000 times from this stage before, you are not the hero of your story. Jesus is, because God's kingdom takes prominence over your own kingdom, because great displays of power are not going to heal this world. Only serving in the way of Jesus can do that. Which brings us to the final challenge out of Mark 9, and it's this: get yourself out of the way. Ask God for strength. Ask God for self-awareness. Be humble. Be self-sacrificing. Reverse the power structures of this world by serving others in the way of Jesus. So then, if you want to be great, do you know how to be great? Be like the greatest. Be like Jesus.